This video contains depictions and references to slavery, racism, violence, abuse, torture, and human suffering that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. The fire began just after midnight. By the time the bells rang across the Louisiana plantation, the main house was already glowing orange against the swamp sky. Smoke rolled over the cane fields in heavy black waves. Sparks drifted through the humid darkness like swarming insects, while enslaved workers sprinted toward the river carrying buckets that would never be enough. Horses screamed inside the stables. Overseers shouted over one another in drunken panic. And somewhere inside the burning mansion, a 22-year-old woman stood calmly beside a wall of plantation ledgers, feeding entire human lives into the flames. Her name was Naomi. History never officially recorded her existence. In the summer of 1798, the Belle Riviere plantation sat along the Mississippi River outside New Orleans. It was one of the wealthiest sugar estates in the territory, a sprawling empire of cane fields, slave cabins, warehouses, and river docks that stretched for miles across the Louisiana lowlands. The owner, Etienne Beaumont, ruled the plantation through fear. He measured worth in profit margins and harvest totals. Sick workers were whipped for slowing production. Families were divided over unpaid debts. Children vanished onto riverboats bound for distant plantations, while mothers screamed helplessly along the shore. Beaumont believed cruelty created order, and for years nobody dared challenge him. But hidden behind the kitchens of Belle Riviere lived a woman Beaumont never truly noticed. Naomi was impossible to ignore physically. She was large even by adult standards, broad-shouldered and heavy-bodied, with a round face that glistened constantly beneath the Louisiana heat. Overseers mocked her openly. They called her ox, pig woman, swamp cow. They laughed at the way she moved. They laughed at the way she sweated. They laughed because they believed humiliation made people smaller. What they never understood was that Naomi listened far more than she spoke. And she remembered everything. She remembered every merchant who stepped off the riverboats carrying leather-bound account books. Every overseer drunk enough to complain about hidden debts. Every whispered conversation between plantation owners terrified of rebellion spreading north from Haiti. Most importantly, Naomi understood something few enslaved people were ever allowed to learn. The plantation did not survive through chains alone. It survived through paper, ownership contracts, bills of sale, debt ledgers, birth records, shipping manifests. Entire human lives compressed into ink and signatures. A document could separate a child from her mother forever. A forged signature could transform a free black person into property. A ledger entry could erase an identity more thoroughly than violence ever could. At Belle Riviere, paper mattered more than flesh, and Beaumont guarded those records more carefully than gold. Every month, account books and ownership contracts were stored inside a locked office beside the plantation library. Thick ledgers filled every shelf from floor to ceiling. Wax seals lined the cabinets. Iron lockboxes protected contracts worth thousands of dollars. To Beaumont, the records represented power itself. To Naomi, they represented something else: weakness. She first entered the records office at age 17. One of the house servants had fallen ill, and Naomi was ordered to carry wine upstairs during a business dinner attended by French merchants from New Orleans. While searching for Beaumont's study, she accidentally wandered into the records room instead. The smell of leather and ink filled the air. Rows of books towered around her like walls. For several seconds, Naomi simply stared. Every person on the plantation existed somewhere inside those shelves. Every whipping, every sale, every death. Then Beaumont appeared behind her. The plantation owner paused in the doorway, irritated at first, before amusement spread across his face. The merchants behind him began laughing immediately. "Look at her," Beaumont said. "She can barely fit through the door, yet she stares at books as if she plans to read them." The room erupted with laughter. Naomi lowered her eyes and apologized softly, but she never forgot the moment. From that day forward, she watched the records office obsessively. She noticed where Beaumont hid the keys after heavy drinking, which windows remained unlatched during storms, which overseers carried duplicates of certain contracts, which cabinets contained ownership papers, and which only stored financial accounts. Most importantly, she learned the habits of powerful men. Powerful men became careless when they believed themselves untouchable. During those years, fear spread across Louisiana plantations like disease. The Haitian Revolution had shattered French colonial control in the Caribbean only a few years earlier. Thousands of enslaved people had risen against their masters, terrifying plantation owners throughout the American South. Rumors of rebellion drifted along river ports and trading docks every week. White families whispered nervously at dinner tables. Militias expanded patrols. Punishments became harsher. At Belle Riviere, Beaumont responded with brutality. Random cabin searches began after dark. Gatherings between enslaved workers were forbidden. Overseers carried pistols openly through the fields. Public whippings became more common, designed not merely to punish but to frighten entire communities into obedience. One August afternoon, Naomi watched an elderly field worker collapse from heat exhaustion beside the cane rows. The overseer kept whipping him anyway. Each strike echoed across the fields while exhausted workers stared silently at the ground. The old man died before sunset. That night, Naomi sat outside the slave cabins listening to women cry softly in darkness. Mosquitoes swarmed around the stagnant swamp water while thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the river. And for the first time in her life, Naomi understood something clearly. The plantation was not invincible. It only appeared permanent because everyone believed the records inside Beaumont's office could never disappear. Months later, disaster arrived from the Gulf. The hurricane struck Louisiana with almost no warning. By sunset, black storm clouds swallowed the horizon. Wind tore through the cane fields hard enough to flatten entire sections of crop. Rain hammered rooftops while river water surged against the docks. Then lightning struck the storage barn beside the main house. Fire exploded through the dry timber instantly. The plantation descended into chaos. Workers rushed toward the flames, carrying buckets from the river, while overseers screamed contradictory orders through the smoke. Horses kicked against stable doors. Burning embers scattered across rooftops as hurricane winds spread the fire faster than anyone could control it. And during the confusion, Naomi disappeared into the mansion. Nobody noticed. Smoke already curled through the hallways when she entered the records office. The room glowed dimly beneath flickering firelight. Heat pressed against the walls while distant screams echoed somewhere outside. Naomi closed the door behind her. For a long moment, she simply stood there staring at the shelves. Hundreds of names surrounded her. Entire generations trapped inside paper. She imagined mothers sold southward. Children separated forever. Men whipped half to death because numbers inside those books declared them property instead of human beings. Then Naomi picked up the first ledger. She carried it to the fireplace beside Beaumont's desk and shoved it directly into the flames. The dry paper ignited immediately. Fire crawled hungrily across the pages. Ink blackened and curled. Names vanished into smoke. Naomi grabbed another ledger, then another. Soon she was moving desperately through the room, feeding contracts, bills of sale, and ownership records into the growing fire. Shelves emptied one after another while smoke thickened around her lungs. The flames spread quickly. Wax seals melted. Cabinets cracked from the heat. Ownership papers floated upward as burning ash. Outside, the hurricane winds drove the mansion fire harder through the upper floors. Ceiling beams groaned overhead while sparks rained into the records office. Still, Naomi kept burning the ledgers. She knew there were too many to destroy completely, but she also knew something else. Confusion could destroy a plantation almost as effectively as rebellion. Without records, debts became uncertain. Ownership became questionable. Human property became difficult to prove. And powerful men feared uncertainty more than violence. The ceiling above her suddenly exploded in sparks. A burning beam crashed across one side of the office. Naomi stumbled backward, coughing violently, as flames surged toward the doorway. Smoke swallowed the room so completely she could barely see the shelves anymore. But even then, she reached for one final stack of contracts and threw them into the fire. By the time another servant found her, Naomi was half-conscious beside the burning desk, surrounded by collapsing shelves and ash-covered paper. The servant dragged her through the smoke moments before the office ceiling caved inward. Nobody understood what she had done. At first, Beaumont believed the records had simply burned during the hurricane. Furious but distracted, he focused on rebuilding damaged structures and salvaging what remained of the plantation's harvest. Then the legal disputes began. A merchant arrived demanding proof of ownership for several enslaved workers recently purchased through Beaumont's accounts. The contracts were gone. Another plantation claimed rights to transferred workers from years earlier. Those documents had vanished too. Birth records disappeared. Debt records vanished. Bills of sale no longer existed. Within weeks, legal chaos spread throughout the territory. Several enslaved people technically could not be proven as property anymore. Lawyers demanded evidence Beaumont could no longer provide. Rival plantation owners accused him of fraud. Courts became flooded with disputes involving missing contracts and destroyed records. Some enslaved workers escaped during the confusion. Others argued they had been illegally purchased in the first place. And slowly, whispers spread along the Mississippi River. Something impossible had happened at Belle Riviere. Then Beaumont discovered the truth. One terrified servant admitted seeing Naomi inside the records office during the fire. Another revealed that sections of the ledgers had clearly been stacked deliberately into the fireplace before the room collapsed. Beaumont realized the fire had not merely destroyed his records. Someone had chosen to destroy them. And suddenly, the plantation owner understood the scale of what Naomi had done. She had attacked the foundation beneath the entire system. The punishment came immediately. Naomi was dragged before the plantation at sunrise and tied to a whipping post beneath the brutal Louisiana heat. Every enslaved worker was forced to watch while Beaumont demanded the names of anyone who helped her. Naomi said nothing. The overseers whipped her until blood soaked the wooden post. Still, she remained silent. Beaumont stepped closer, his face pale with rage. "You burned my fortune," he whispered. Naomi lifted her head slowly despite the blood running down her back. "No," she said quietly, "I burned your proof." The words silenced the entire plantation. Even the overseers froze. And for the first time in his life, Beaumont looked afraid. Because in that moment, he realized an enslaved woman had discovered the hidden weakness beneath the entire slave economy. Paper could burn. Ink could vanish. And without records, power itself became fragile. Stories spread quickly across Louisiana. Boatmen carried rumors downriver toward New Orleans. Field workers whispered Naomi's name after dark. Some claimed she destroyed every ownership record on the plantation. Others insisted entire families escaped because their legal status could no longer be proven. The story grew larger with each telling. People called her the woman who burned slavery's memory. Plantation owners panicked. Many began duplicating records in multiple locations. Some built separate fireproof storage buildings for contracts and ledgers. Others increased guards around bookkeeping offices, terrified that enslaved workers might begin targeting records instead of masters. Fear spread faster than the fire itself ever had. Meanwhile, Beaumont prepared revenge. He announced Naomi would be sold to a brutal Caribbean sugar colony where enslaved workers rarely survived longer than a few years. The sale was meant to send a message across Louisiana. Disobedience would end in disappearance. But Beaumont made one fatal mistake. He waited too long. By then, Naomi had become something dangerous. A symbol. Enslaved workers across nearby plantations already knew her story. River traders whispered about the woman who burned ownership itself. Free black dock workers in New Orleans passed the tale through taverns and churches, and several men decided Naomi could not be allowed to vanish. The rescue happened during transport. 3 nights before her scheduled departure, Beaumont's convoy traveled through swamp roads north of New Orleans beneath heavy fog. Naomi sat chained inside a wagon guarded by armed riders carrying lanterns through the darkness. Then gunshots shattered the night. Horses screamed. One rider collapsed instantly into the mud. Another disappeared into the reeds after a second shot echoed through the swamp. The ambush lasted less than 2 minutes. By the time the surviving guards regrouped, Naomi was gone. So were the attackers. The Louisiana swamp swallowed them completely. For weeks, Beaumont organized search parties through the marshlands. Hunters tracked footprints through mud and broken reeds. Rewards were offered across the territory for Naomi's capture, dead or alive. But the wilderness protected its own secrets. Some claimed they saw a large woman moving silently through the cypress trees at dusk. Others reported hearing distant singing deep within the fog-covered marshes. A ferryman swore he transported an injured black woman northward beneath a hidden tarp inside his boat. Nobody could confirm any of it. Months passed, then years. Eventually, rumors replaced facts entirely. One preacher claimed Naomi reached Spanish territory where free black communities sheltered escaped slaves. A trader insisted he met a giant woman working in a Mississippi River kitchen who refused to explain the scars covering her back. Another story claimed she joined networks helping fugitives escape northward long before the Underground Railroad officially existed. Whether any of it was true no longer mattered. The damage had already been done. Belle Riviere never recovered. Without proper records, Beaumont lost lawsuits across the territory. Investors abandoned him. Rival plantation owners mocked him publicly. Workers escaped faster than they could be replaced. Financial confusion consumed the estate year after year. Within a decade, the once powerful plantation collapsed into debt. Beaumont died nearly bankrupt. According to local legend, he spent his final years obsessively rewriting names into blank books, trying desperately to recreate the ledgers Naomi destroyed. But memory is not ownership, and fear is not law. As decades passed, Naomi's story transformed into folklore throughout Louisiana. Some versions claim she became a revolutionary leader hiding among free black settlements. Others insisted she died anonymously somewhere deep within the swamps she once escaped through. Abolitionists later repeated the tale as proof that slavery's power depended as much on paperwork as violence. Most historians dismissed the entire story as myth. Yet scattered legal records from late 18th century Louisiana describe unusual property disputes following a plantation fire outside New Orleans. And buried deep inside one surviving court testimony appears a single haunting sentence: the woman cast the papers into the flames herself. No name followed. No official record explained where she went afterward. Only that sentence remained. By the time slavery finally ended in America generations later, countless plantation ledgers had already disappeared into floods, courthouse fires, hurricanes, and decay. Ink faded, paper rotted. Entire fortunes vanished into dust. The empires built upon those records collapsed with them. But somewhere in the shadows of Louisiana history, people still remembered the story of the fat woman who burned the plantation ledgers. The woman mocked for her size. The servant powerful men believed too insignificant to matter. The one who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous weapon against oppression is not a gun, a knife, or an army, but hunger for positive change. If Naomi had destroyed every plantation ledger in the region instead of just Belle Riviere's records, how might the entire slave economy in Louisiana have changed decades before abolition? Beaumont believed violence created power, but Naomi targeted paperwork instead of people. What does the story suggest about the real foundations of oppressive systems? Naomi became a legend because she attacked the proof of ownership itself. In modern society, what kinds of records, systems, or institutions hold similar power over people's lives today? Subscribe to Thalarin History Channel for more shocking, untold dark history. Share and click like button if this story absolutely blew your mind.